Hey guys, what's up? Squatch Talk with Pat and Ern. I'm Pat.
And I'm Ernie, and we are the Primate Objective. Welcome to episode 6. What do you think we ought to talk about today, Mr. Pat?
Well, we're going to talk about one of my very favorite subjects. And it's not one of my favorite things, but it's one of my favorite subjects I've been studying for 20 plus years, and that's government. And of course, when it comes to Sasquatch, what's going on with the government cover-up? There seems to be a lot of imagination out there versus reality.
Correct.
And we're going to get into that and try and get into it in a reasonable, realistic way, I think.
Yeah, we'll be, obviously, this is a topic where we don't have an official, we don't have, we don't have insiders from various agencies to tell us. So a lot of what we talk about today will be speculative, but it will be speculation based on some pretty practical extrapolating from what we know. And if this species that we call Sasquatch is real, if it exists, and all these theoretical things that we kind of come up with to sort of help explain how such a species could exist, then an element of cover-up is obviously part of this phenomenon. It would have to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, where would you like to start?
Well, I'd like to start in saying that, I've actually changed my position on this. I used to take the position in just very knee-jerk way. Back before we really were started seriously getting into the Sasquatch thing, I would just kind of like, man, there's no way. I mean, government either doesn't know about them, or if they do, they wouldn't cover them up. There's no reason to. Just on the surface didn't seem to make sense. It's like, why? That's like covering up a bear, or something. It's like, there's no reason to do that. And of course, I've changed my position now. I'm convinced that there is government knowledge of these things on some level. And I see no reason to believe it goes all the way to the top. In other words, my governor doesn't know that Sasquatch exists unless he's seen one.
Right.
And, Donald Trump doesn't know they exist, more than likely. My congressman and et cetera,
I used to feel similarly when I got into the research and studied a lot and realized, the people use that term a lot, the government, and kind of a broad statement like that. What I've come to learn is that, because this is such a reclusive, rarely occurring species, that the occasions where private citizens have an encounter or perhaps have shot one, something like that, and they wind up calling an official on the phone. They call the cops. If it's animal related, they refer them to animal control. If animal control doesn't know what to do, they're going to call the local state fish and game agency. If they don't know what's going on, they call their superior. So my argument has always been, since incidents like that don't happen every week, as we would assume,
right,
that it just simply would not be that difficult on the occasions where the higher ups are called in to oversee some sort of Sasquatch encounter or body or whatever. I don't think it would be that difficult to keep that information compartmentalized. And in recent years, I've heard lots of other folks in other fields talk about doing, secretive projects for the government, or maybe just something that's classified. It doesn't have to be some sort of skullduggery. And they'll say, hey, look, I was involved with the government doing these kinds of projects, that kind of project, as a scientist, whatever, for so many years, and hundreds of people were all told to keep it quiet, and every one of them did. Sure. It was simply a policy. And I don't want to hog it. Well, please let me throw back to you here, but because there's there's the agencies, there's wildlife agencies, then there's the timber and mining industry. And so there's a few different things we're going to touch on talking about all this. But again, it's just important for people to realize this kind of information would not have to be kept secret agency wide. You know, it doesn't have to be the government that knows everything. It can really be a handful of people in certain offices. You know, that's really about all it would take.
Yeah. And, you know, just to look at the scope, to kind of, you know, frame it, the scope of everything. The United States federal government is the United States' largest employer. So the largest body of employment for work in the United States is for the federal government, and it's humongous. Millions and millions of people work for the government. And then you start throwing in on top of that state government and then local municipalities. Then, I mean, you got, you know, a third of the country working for the government. It's kind of crazy. So yeah, somebody who sits in a social security office doing, you know, auditing doesn't or wouldn't need to know anything about Sasquatch, obviously. Right. That goes without saying. So the government is huge. And so then we start getting into the relevant departments, right? And so on the federal level, we have Department of Interior, okay? And that department alone is huge. It branches out all over the place. That's where you get your BLM, your Bureau of Land Management, and Native American things are thrown in there, and it's got a $20 billion budget a year, and that's per 2013. It's probably gone up since then.
The Department of the Interior is a broadly encompassing agency name that includes the Forestry Service, the Park Service, like you said, the Bureau of Land Management. It includes lots of other agencies.
It does.
It's important for folks to remember that context when we begin talking about, say, a forest ranger or a DNR, or, a fish and game, any kind of wildlife employees or BLM employees. Bear in mind that all falls underneath the Department of the Interior.
Correct. So just to break it down sort of visually, you know, you have at the very top, this is the Secretary of the Department of Interior, right? And then at the very bottom, you've got U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement. So those are at the bottom. So those are the people, let's just say the boots on the ground. Mm-hmm. Those would be the compartments or departments in this case that would have boots on the ground. And then, of course, Bureau of Land Management kind of falls somewhere in the middle. And as we've seen in the past, with the whole Bundy situation, you know, they have an enforcement section in their department as well, and a pretty, you know, that look like operators, essentially. So those guys do exist in these different departments.
Oh yeah. Let's just kind of start with an example, a theoretical example of what would happen. Let's say, well, you and I are familiar with that guy in Virginia that claimed to have shot the guy down in Florida, who our friend Justin met and said was credible. Well, actually, let's take that guy in Florida as an example.
Yeah.
He claims that you've got somebody who's working, helping to fight forest fires as a contractor for the Forestry Service. And claims he and his partner, late at night, they hit a Sasquatch creature with a giant truck. They've run over it. They've killed it. Well, they call their superiors. The superiors come out. They're not quite sure what's going on. They call their superiors, and someone else comes out. And then the two men who were driving the truck are taken away from that scene, and then they are debriefed later by some people that tell them in a closed room, hey, what you hit was a bear.
Yeah.
That kind of, and then they're kind of left, all right, that's it. What you saw was a bear. You didn't see what you thought you see. Do you understand? And then the meeting's over. Now, that scenario has been described many times.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for whatever it's worth for listeners, as far as this keeping this whole subject of cover-up, you know, the two guys are not going to be able to go to the newspaper the next day without proof and make any claim. They don't have to be watched, you know, by the government to make sure they don't say anything. They're not going to be believed. You know, the two forest rangers who were initially there on the scene, well, folks need to remember that to get on with one of those agencies is a very difficult thing to do. There are long waiting lists. Those are highly coveted jobs, park rangers, forest rangers, that sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
wildlife officials, and with incredible benefits.
Yeah, great pensions. Yeah.
You got a great pension, great benefits. You got a wife, family. You've got a job. It took you forever to get, you know, and you're just not going to blow it by running around telling everybody that you discovered that Bigfoot is in fact real. So on the rare occasions that, you know, a couple or a few people have to be dispatched from a particular agency and they wind up encountering an actual Sasquatch, well, that doesn't mean that it's going to be on CNN the next day. So
Yeah.
that sort of, you know, rare occasion where actual government officials are on a scene somewhere. It doesn't mean that they had to be in the know when they showed up, and it certainly doesn't mean that they can't easily keep that information to themselves, particularly when they're told they have to.
Yeah, exactly. And again, we're only dealing with a few departments that would even have the ability to have the kind, you know, boots on the ground, men in black, you know, this, which by the way, they don't wear black. they show up in civilian clothes, or, you know, maybe look like G-men a little bit. I don't know. But you know, these departments would have the kind of resources it would take to intimidate somebody or have a talking to, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And those would be the departments that I cited earlier. And then, of course, the other one would be your state, which would be DNR, the Department of Natural Resources. Every state has their own DNR because every state's Department of Natural Resources are different, obviously. You know, those guys would be boots on the ground too. So these would be the actual departments that you would find within those departments, the people who are in the know, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fair to say.
I agree. Mm-hmm.
A lot of people like to imagine that the all-powerful government, which government is powerful, but people like to imagine that there's all kinds of crazy secret stuff going on in the government that it explains everything that happens weird in the world, right? You know, the reality is that government is so large and so out of touch that it is extremely incompetent. So,
yes, it is.
So the fewer people that know about Sasquatch in the government, the easier it is for them to cover it up. That's pretty simple logic.
And it also, I believe, it has simply kind of worked out this way. In other words, if Sasquatches were as prolific as bears, then obviously they couldn't cover it up no matter what they did. If Sasquatches were hovering above the cities in full view in the sky, they couldn't cover it up.
Right.
But it just so happens that over time, as this country grew, as the population grew, as our government grew, as development grew, you know, again, that we're talking about such a rarely occurring species, and even extremely rare occurrences of where people are actually in contact with something that they can call an official about. So, yeah, I think it kind of worked out, you know, to where the government so far up to this day has, you know, it's a good chance no matter what certain levels of the government may know, they probably still don't know everything. And if you don't know everything, then what the heck are you going to say to the public about it? you know, if you can't tell them everything because you don't know it, or maybe the truth is just a little too hard for everybody to understand, then yeah, I guess you're just going to have to sit on it. Most people, what you and I do not talk about UFOs or any other phenomenons, but because most people tend to accept that UFOs are at least possible, and that if they're possible, it's probably unlikely the government is in the dark completely. Most folks would agree that there are certain levels of the government that must know. If UFOs are real, if aliens are real, obviously there's going to be compartmentalized secret government knowledge of it, and they can't possibly tell everybody. So you got to look at how much easier it would be to keep, you know, the few incidents that happen every few years secret about Sasquatch.
Yeah. And, you know, there's precedent for this that is known. And one of those things is, why do so many states refuse to admit there are mountain lions in certain areas of the states? And you see that in many places around the country, Ernie. You know this.
Oh, absolutely.
And why? Why do they do that? And they will go out of their way to cover that up. I mean, that has been documented.
You're right. And from what I understand, the official line is, well, okay, so you have a picture, or you found tracks or whatever, but that's just a mountain lion passing through this area. You know, and they'll maintain that that particular state does not have a resident, viable, reproducing population of mountain lions. Now, I don't know, to answer your rhetorical question there, I don't really know why that has to be covered up, but it's very common with the mountain.
Could be laziness, you know. I don't know. I watched a great video. I'll try and remember the channel. I think it's Pennsylvania Bigfoot Research. This guy, he's pretty good. He puts together good videos. But he had a guy on his show tell a story about a full-blown shutting down the road. Somebody hit a mountain lion in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And the authorities came in and shut down the road just to get the mountain lion body out of there. They went to that extent to cover it up. And of course, there was photographs and everything. They had to admit that, you know, this event happened, but there you go.
Yeah, there's there's a whole lot that I am completely uneducated about in terms of what all the processes are that are involved when having to list a species as existing in a certain area. I don't know. Perhaps there are other things. I don't want to get bogged down in stuff that we don't know about. But it's a very interesting footnote in our Bigfoot research that the mountain lion issue has been kind of a hot topic for some people.
Yeah. Do you know?
Because we're not talking about another species of raccoon. We're talking about an apex predator, mountain lion. So you'd think that their presence would be, why would that be such a touchy thing? But
and they're very dangerous. It's good to know that they're out there, Yeah.
Exactly. Now, do you think we ought to move on to the lumber and the mining and stuff from here?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure of your angle there.
Of the you mean the timber angle?
Yeah.
I have read many articles, and the spotted owl scare is an example that a lot of people cite. And you mentioned the Bureau of Land Management, so listeners should, on their own, because it's a pretty convoluted relationship, should look into how the Bureau of Land Management is is involved with private industry, private industry with timber growers and that sort of thing. What I've heard in my Bigfoot research, when people would, float reasons why a cover-up needed to be maintained, one of the reasons, and again, I believe that it would be several reasons that this has all been covered up as best as it could be by those who had the ability to cover up what little info they had over the years. I think that it's everything from the dangers of the species itself, which a wildlife agency would want to keep quiet. Then and of course the worry of public hysteria. But when it comes to the timber, the industries of timber and mining, I believe that would be a huge issue.
Could be.
We don't think about timber as being that big of a deal, but my God, it's everywhere. We use timber to build everything still. It is a huge industry. It's as you say, we can replant trees. It's a renewable resource, and it is probably one of I guess the biggest building material that we have, right?
Oh, it absolutely is. And there's no replacement for it. And if you want to pay $500,000 for 1,800 square foot home, then fine, let's not use timber anymore. Timber's not going anywhere. Sasquatch will not shut down the timber industry because it is too vital of a resource in this country and really in the world to stop.
I do. I agree with that. But where I think a potential butting of heads and a big problem would occur is just between the environmentalist groups who want to, they want to protect everything from living creatures to the trees themselves, even though these trees are grown specifically to be cut in most areas. I can't sit here and tell everybody that I know for sure. I'm just we're tossing out what we think are, some legitimate reasons why. And I think that timber, logging, and mining are two huge industries that if an intelligent species of hominid was verified to exist in North America, I believe that it would have staggering results for all kinds of land boundaries. I think that it would, in the beginning at least, because of all the fear and all the uproar of the shock of it all, and everyone wanting to back off and make sure, okay, we got to make sure the species is protected. And what about habitat? And what about this? And everybody would kind of be up in arms over something that hadn't really been fully studied yet. And so I just think that there's going to be a lot of smoke, a lot of blow ups, a lot of dust ups. I personally think that timber and all the land associated, not just timber. I mean, it's been suggested that people with private holdings of land exceeding 300 acres could even be affected if such a species were listed to exist.
Yeah, you never know. I mean,
I don't know,
I can, based on my studies over the past 2 decades, I mean, I could certainly get an idea. Although I don't want to get into the political realm, obviously, on this show, but I'll just say this: there is a certain ideology and a certain demographic of politicians who I believe would wield Bigfoot as a weapon. I mean, they would weaponize it to carry out agendas. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Now, would they be successful? Would they be in charge? Though, who knows, man? I mean, you're getting way down the rabbit hole with all that. But
exactly, and it's all speculative. I'm just citing what I think would be some major stumbling blocks within American industry.
Yeah,
and there's so much money involved. It's not just the people that go out and cut down the trees and the guys that drive the trucks. I mean, it's every end of it. And mining is a big damn deal in North America. There are a lot of things like columbite, tantalite, coltan for short, that is used in all of our electronic and digital devices these days. I mean, there's even blood coltan now in the Congo. It's a highly sought after material, and it was mined for a while in North America. not so much anymore, but it's just an example of how there is a whole lot more money and a lot more industry involved in pulling natural resources out of the ground that if Sasquatches are proven to walk upon, then these factions of government that you mentioned that are knee-jerk reactionaries, as well as all the support groups for environmental causes, I think that, again, like you say, it may not pan out in the end that any of those folks are in control or that they swayed anything, but I think it's a good deterrent from the government wanting to just spill the beans. I think it's one more example of why probably ought to disseminate this a little more slowly, if at all, would be the government's position. That's just my take on it, though.
Yeah, and you could even have a situation where the people, sort of boots on the ground people in government, understand and that they need to keep knowledge of it away from the politicians, away from the secretaries, away from the judges. They may be doing us a favor and we don't even know it. Again, that's speculation. That's based on my own sort of opinions and biases about government, but it could be that as well. So, but yeah, I want to talk about shift gears back to the boots on the ground and talk about how incidences, like an incident, would be dealt with, right? Let's say if someone hit one with a car, or someone shot one, or had a violent encounter and was trying to call the police or DNR or whoever, who would deal with that? Now, I noticed in the Sasquatch world, a lot of people think that there are just, I guess, teams of Navy SEALs, ex-Navy SEALs, sitting on tarmacs all over the country, sitting around waiting for something to happen, and they go jump into their helicopters, World War II style, when the Germans are attacking, and fly to the incident. And it's just, they're that competent and that reliable. And reality says that nothing could be further from the truth.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with that also.
I think these things are known to some degree by some people in each one of these departments that are closer to the ground, like we talked about, the DNR side, the wildlife management, the different departments of the Department of Interior that are close to the ground. There has to be knowledge, and because if there is an incident, somebody's got to know how to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
And somebody has to have a higher up that knows how to deal with it.
Absolutely. There's obviously got to be a chain where, if this official doesn't know what to make of it, he's got to have somebody higher up that he calls when he can't handle something, regardless of what it is. And so I would think that eventually, incidents of unidentified animals are going to make their way up a certain command. You're not going to keep calling the guy. You're not going to keep calling homicide. You're not going to keep calling the jail. You're not going to keep calling the dog catcher. If they can't help you, the phone call is going to make it a little further up the line.
Yeah, and depending on how bad the incident is, then you would have to bring in the hush guys. I'm going to call them, not Men in Black, but the hush guys who come in and clean up the mess, try and straighten everybody out.
And I'd like to interject before we continue. I don't believe that this is something that the government, that these departments or the people in them with the knowledge can forever cover up, or think that can forever contain this. In other words, everything that Pat and I are discussing, I still believe that those handfuls of folks in the government that are in the know also know that any day a person who does hit one with a car or shoots one with a rifle that it's possible that person could get it in the truck and drive it to Walmart or get it in front of news cameras before they have a chance, and then it's out. I believe that the handfuls of folks that are in the government with the know-how also know that that's possible. They're
Yeah.
not sitting back with their smoking jacket and glass of cognac, giggling to themselves that no one will ever find out because we've got it all sewn up. That I don't believe that at all. But I believe whenever they have the opportunity, and that they have so far been able to wrap things up when they were called.
Yeah, I think so too. I think they've probably learned over the years, and they've probably come up with different scenarios and do what they can do, within their skill sets and within their budget, within their power, ability, whatever amounts of power they have. And if they're an enforcement agency, then they have more power than a different type of agency that doesn't have a big enforcement budget, right?
Yeah.
Because after all, that's what we're talking about here. That's what it boils down to is a form of enforcement. When somebody shows up and tries to tell you as a United States citizen, what you can and can't do or say, that's a slippery slope.
That's right. Slippery slope. And I think a lot of people, again, I don't believe there's ever been an auditorium with 100 people in it being told that story. It's usually going to be one or two guys, right? One or two people are going to be told to keep their mouth shut at a time. It wouldn't be that difficult, for people for government folks to show up and say, all right, you saw a bear, end of story.
Yeah. If there were ever an incident that involved 100 or 200 people, that's it. There's no way. There's no way they can cover that up.
Right.
Yeah.
And so having said that, I just wanted everybody to understand we don't believe that it's something that can be contained just with an idea or a plan. It's all it takes is one more Justin Smea or some scenario like that. And perhaps this day and age, because the Sasquatch phenomenon is so much more prevalent in our culture and our consciousness, maybe the next guy will be more bold and say, yeah, I know what this is, and by God, I'm throwing it behind the seat, and we're going into town. We're getting in front of news cameras. Do you want to talk about, I'd like to at least talk about what I think is also a concern. I'm not sure if any particular government agency would be in charge of this, so to speak, but the overall public reaction to such a discovery being made public, I think would be overwhelming. I really do.
It would be huge.
I think it would scare the hell out of a lot of people. You and I have talked about, of course, there would inevitably, I can't even speak, inevitably be lots of hunters attempting.
I think so.
Perhaps attempting to get in and out of the woods with a specimen, but that's already been going on for 50, 60 years. Nobody's pulled it off yet when they had the intent. So if Sasquatch were proven to be a real species on the news tomorrow with a big 9-foot tall corpse laying in a pickup truck somewhere, before anything could be listed, before anything could be protected, you can rest assured that all of those agencies would be on high alert, and they would be on the lookout for truckloads of people from out of town suddenly showing up and walking into the woods with rifles. There would just be so much of a reaction in the public. And by the way, if the government were to come clean and have a press conference, whether they were coming clean, being the ones with the proof, disseminating it, or because a guy with the pickup truck got it in front of cameras and now the government has to say something, man, they're going to have to say, yeah, they're dangerous. What little we know, it appears they do take people. I'm just going to say that's got to be a known thing. It's just got to be a known thing on some level. If the government has to be public, say anything public about their knowledge, they're probably going to have to include something like that or play completely dumb about it. But either way, the public's going to be nervous. It's going to make the public pretty darn nervous to know that 9-foot tall hairy monsters live in the woods.
Yeah, and they might kill you if you make them mad enough. Yeah, and which is understandable. I mean, people get killed by bears. People get killed by mountain lion. You know, a wild animal is a wild animal, and the more powerful, the easier it is for them to kill you.
That's right.
And like I said on the Bakara episode, I'm sure it's happened, and therefore I'm sure the government has known that too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we go out of our way. You know, if somebody goes for a hike, doesn't come back when they were supposed to, we'll send 100 people looking for them out in the woods. Right. You know, and fly helicopters and spend $1 million. You know, looking for a missing hiker. So, I mean, you can imagine if, you know, a bad scene was discovered, you know, where there are body parts laying around, you know, bears don't do that. So.
Well, the reason that you and I are talking about this is because we believe it's highly likely that the species of Sasquatches actually exist, that it's a flesh and blood species out there. And so, we have to sort of mentally, you know, extrapolate and say, well, if it's possible, then how could it be? How could it stay hidden? We have addressed the biological part. Now we're sort of addressing the systematic part of what would have to be a cover up on some level. And I think all these details we've mentioned, from lumber to mining to environmental protection, you've also just got the public at large and their reaction to consider. I personally think that it would be almost overwhelming for a lot of people. Of course, it would be maybe the biggest discovery in modern history. I'm not even sure how I would feel about it. You know, I live in a tiny cabin in the middle of the woods, and here I am, a huge advocate, a huge proponent of for the possibility of this species existing. Yet, I don't want to see one near me, man. I don't want to see one. If it exists, I don't want to see one on my property. I really don't. I've heard you and I both, Pat, have heard a lot. And if we're to believe a significant portion, the most compelling aspects of this phenomenon, then we are to believe that here and there these things are dangerous, and that sometimes people go missing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to consider here.
There is
a lot to consider here.
It's what's the saying, Ernie? You know, the difference between people like you and me who have never seen one, and then people who know because they have seen one. You know what I mean? There's a difference. Yeah. What is that?
They're not believers, you know. So you believe in Sasquatch then? So no, I don't believe in it. I was a non-believer. I had a belief system before I saw it, but now that I've seen it, no, it's not a question of faith. It's I know they're there.
Yeah,
you know, I'm a knower, not a believer.
Well, yeah, and to me, it's not a question of faith either, because that's almost religious. But there is a difference between people who think that they likely exist, and then the people who have seen them who go, well, I know they exist. And as a nation with discovery, as a nation, we would become a nation of knowers.
Right.
And that does change your perspective on going in the woods.
Yes.
And I think there would be poachers. And I think poaching would be a little out of control.
I think you're right. If they could at all be successful, and chances are most of them couldn't be. I don't think they could be.
They'd be getting killed, dude.
People, you say?
Yeah, the hunters who don't know, who wake up tomorrow and go, oh my God, those things are real. Let's go get one. They don't know anything about Bigfoot. They never believed in it. So they didn't have any kind of knowledge of what these things are. And they're going to go out in the woods, dude. They're going to get killed. You and I both know that.
It's going to be a mess.
Yeah.
It would be a huge mess. And again, another thing to consider. is to, is to consider what would happen should this all become public knowledge tomorrow. I think it would be absolutely astounding. It would be astounding for me. It would be astounding for you. I can't imagine what it would be like for people that just could not wrap their heads around it.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Like I said, maybe these cover-up guys, people like to think of them as the bad guys. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're the good guys.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
It's quite possible. And buddy, who knows? Who knows what kind of stuff we don't know, given the history of, government knowledge? Who knows? Who knows what all's going on?
I mean, think about it this way, people that are in the, intelligence aspect of government, who are national security people, they have our best interest in mind. They're trying to keep the population safe by rooting out terrorist organizations and finding where they are, and, sending a predator missile their way or every now and then, maybe it's something like that,
Well, we just don't know. We just don't know, but we can be pretty sure that if these creatures exist, then yes, there has to be certain degrees of knowledge within certain departments of the government. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It sure would be nice if we could gain any kind of access to the sort of list that I had mentioned when Dave Picara was on, that John Mayanchinski mentioned. He says that he and Meldrum and the North American Ape Project, they have a growing list of wildlife agency officials who have confided their stories in them. They've confided their stories to Mayanchinski and Meldrum for their scientific use in their study, but on the condition that these wildlife officials' names stay anonymous. That to me, there's your gold mine. There's your gold mine of information, insider knowledge, and sure would be nice to pick those guys' brains.
It would, and I can't cite any specific things that I've heard or where to find them on YouTube, but there's all kinds of anonymous, supposedly, government officials who have come forward and said some, pretty amazing things. Like, I remember hearing one time say that there was a special number. If somebody calls you to say they saw a Bigfoot, you call this number and report it, like the Bigfoot number, And
while we're talking about any specifics, one name that comes to mind, a forest ranger named Roger Blaine, or he may have been a national park ranger in Washington State. He has appeared in 2 television documentaries about Bigfoot. One is called Giganto, the Real King Kong. It's a documentary about Gigantopithecus with its relation to the Bigfoot phenomenon. Roger Blaine appears in that, and he appears in another Bigfoot documentary, tells his story with his credentials, Class A, daytime roadside crossing. He's just one example of a government official that we're talking about who knows the difference between bears and people. He had a Class A encounter. We just mentioned John Mayanchinski, who is a wildlife field biologist who does extensive work in the field, staying in the field, doing a study on bighorn sheep or a study on this or that. And he had an encounter. Mel Skahan, Skahan, was a timber cruiser. I forget his tribe. I believe he's with the Navajo Reservation. But people can look up Mel Skahan, listen to his encounter. There's also a retired forest ranger from Arkansas. There's a small video of him talking, and he was, which is taken from the end of a documentary about Bigfoot in the Arkansas area. So these people do exist, and they have come forward.
Yeah, and there's even more than that. Yeah,
maybe not in floods, and they're certainly not. Again, we talked about pensions and federal jobs. You know, there's a lot to lose. Just because you retire doesn't mean you can suddenly just go out and tell every little confidential secret that you learned during your career. So,
Yeah.
But these people are out there, and, you know, listeners are encouraged to ferret that stuff out just like we did. It's all public information.
Yeah. And I've heard a lot of anonymous ones.
Oh, yeah.
That are very compelling, you know.
They are.
Just very, one comes to mind. I think it has like 250,000 views on YouTube. It was a guy, he was like a warden out in the Northwest, not specific, but out in the Northwest. And he had 3 or 4 encounters. And in his first encounter, he shot it. And I'm sure it'll come to you. I'm sure you've heard it, Ernie.
I'm sure I have too.
It was eating a deer that had been caught in a trap, and then
recently
it got up and came towards the guy very aggressively. And he had 30-06, and he shot it in center mass. It went down, basically grabbed the deer and ran off. And he reported it as a strange animal, or as a Bigfoot, you know, when which gives you a little insight, right? So his superior showed up, and he was like an older guy, and said, no, you can't say that that's what it was, man. And he said, well, I'm going to, you know. And so there you go. Like, this guy was trying to tell him, no, don't go there, you know. So they I think they have a weird like policing of themselves as well, you know.
Well, they appear to. It was either that guy or another guy who, again, they're anonymous, but if they call into a Bigfoot podcast, they have detailed knowledge of the departments, the policies of the particular agency that they're with. So they do sound informed and compelling. And as I recall, this guy was saying that the way the process worked for those kinds of officials in those agencies is they fill out one report that says, yes, it was this kind of creature. Here's what it looked like, everything they saw. But then they have to, that goes in one file.
Right.
That goes locked away. And then they have to fill out another report that describes it as a known animal. And the closest one usually is a bear. So they're told to put down bear. Again,
yeah,
from an anonymous source, but someone who appeared to have a great deal of knowledge about their agency and how things were done.
Yeah. I think that they have to even, you know, police themselves, and maybe, you know, again, the boots on the ground guys, they just they may even have a don't ask, don't tell policy, you know.
They would almost have to, it seems.
Yeah. Like, if you, did anybody get killed? No? Okay. Shut up about it.
Case closed.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
You shot a bear and it got away.
Mm-hmm.
Fell off a ravine, whatever, you know.
And while we're talking about it, you know, another great example. Alleged eyewitness. As compelling as anything I've ever heard. I wish that I had checked the title of the YouTube video before doing this. But it's the guy that calls into, I believe it's the Crypto Crew is the name of the podcast, and he calls in from Virginia. And he claims to have shot and dropped a Sasquatch. He had an encounter with 2 of them. And he claims that he reported it and was visited by his local wildlife official. And it's a very, very compelling story.
Mm-hmm.
So the wildlife official that was with him was able to inspect tracks, was able to take a blood sample. And then this eyewitness was visited later by 2 other men who claimed to be from a government agency, who told him, like we've heard many times before, to shut his mouth. And but that is perhaps one of the most compelling interviews that I've ever heard from someone that I've never met or spoken to personally. And if that man is an actor, he is the best actor. He's better than any actor that's ever lived.
Yeah, I agree.
It is the most compelling interview I think I've ever heard. It really is.
Yeah. And one thing we'll be able to do, Ernie, when we talk to Justin pretty soon here, is we'll be able to pick his brain about some of that and really try and get some detail out of him about when he dealt with his, fish and wildlife guys that came out to his property, and asked him questions.
That's right. They knocked on his door, and Justin's encounter, which we look forward to having him talking about that a bit here soon. And again, back to this guy, this caller from Virginia, that folks can find. Again, I think it's the Crypto Crew video. But that'll give folks a good idea as to how isolated events like this could easily be contained and covered up by the few officials that are called onto the scene.
Yeah. I think it's all within the realm of possibility and reality thus far.
Thus far, correct.
But eventually someone's going to screw up. The government is going to screw up. I mean, you can count on that, buddy.
You can count on the government screwing up, and hopefully maybe count on the next guy that does pull the trigger. Not that I'm pro-kill, but if something like that happens, hey, maybe the next Justin Smea will be able to get it in the back of the truck and haul it in front of TV cameras.
Yep. And there's one thing I absolutely want to debunk that seems to be common thought in the Bigfoot world, is that this crazy idea that government is so competent and so powerful that even if you showed up to a news station with cameras and people and if you called somebody from the zoo to come over and look at it, and you had all these things happening, that somehow the government could come in and just wipe that clean. And I'm telling you, they can't. Okay.
Well, yeah, if anybody is able to get a body in the truck, number one is you do not pick up the phone unless you're calling the news station to find out how closely their remote film van can meet you somewhere. But other than that, the only goal should be you're going to have to get it in front of television news media immediately.
And the public too. I mean, just whoever's walking by.
Of course.
Say, hey man, come take as many pictures of this as you want. Pull out your cell phone. I mean, you got 50 people standing around with cell phones. There's no way they can scrub that. There's no way.
No, they can't.
That's what.
Hasn't happened yet. Obviously, that's the one thing that people haven't made it that far yet. If they've had these chances, so
yeah,
you and I believe that if somebody were lucky enough to have a sample, have a specimen, by God, you're going to have to get it in front of those cameras.
Yeah, and the other part of that, which is just ridiculous, is people say this a lot, is that somehow the government would come in and tell the news station that they can't publish this. And I'm here to tell you, man, if there's one thing that news media will stand up and die for, take a bullet for, and that is the First Amendment. No one tells them, other than classified information, that's different, but no one tells the news media what they can and can't report. They will take a bullet in the face to defend the First Amendment. They are hardcore about that. The government's not allowed to do it. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, is the law of the land, and no agency is allowed to operate outside of the Constitution, period.
Yeah, and it's not so much a question. People can argue whether or not what's allowed and whether or not agencies follow the law. The point that you and I are making is that once you get it in front of the news cameras, then it's out. Yeah. It doesn't matter how many news agencies are called after the fact. Or the point you and I are making is, don't call any agencies before you get it in front of the cameras.
Yeah,
that's what hasn't happened so far.
That's what they'll get you. Yeah.
People are panicking and they pick up the telephone and they call the officials. So obviously, if you can get it in front of mass media sources that will go out before any agencies have been called, that apparently is about the only way.
Yeah, but I got to say that would take some guts too, man, because what if it was one that had you know, the weird, really human features, you know.
What about it?
What okay, what I'm saying is, what if you were that dude thinking about that, you had one and you were going to go to the news agency, but what if the Bigfoot had those weird human features?
Gotcha. And
Yeah.
suddenly, as the shooter, I'm a little concerned about, well, I'll just lie.
What am
I'll just say I didn't shoot it. I'll say that the thing was attacking me.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
I'm the shooter, and I've got one down, whether I was hunting it, whether I shot it with bad intent, whether I was, you know, way out of line or not. The first person that brings in a Sasquatch, I don't care if it is human and we can barely distinguish through DNA the differences between us and them, that shooter's not going to jail. That shooter's not going to get charged with anything because he brought in something that doesn't exist. There are no laws against it. We can question the ethics after the fact all day long if someone does drop one and successfully bring it in, and then he's the guy for the history books.
Right.
We can slam his ethics all day long, but no, he's not going to go to jail.
You would think, but it might be something to, you know, consider. You know.
Oh, hey, if I was the guy and it looked human, yeah, it would make me pause. But I would probably think, well, looks like I'm about to be the guy. So
yeah.
Worst case scenario, I got to spend a day or two in jail until they sort things out. I'll still be the guy. So
yeah.
But again, it all matters. What matters is getting it in front of television cameras. You know, that's the point we're trying to make here.
I think ultimately in that situation, greed would get the best of most people, because I think everybody has a sense of, you know, if I'm the person to discover Sasquatch, I can surely monetize that somehow in a very big way.
Right.
You know, so. All right. Well, I think we covered all those bases, dude.
I think we have too. I hope we did a fairly decent job at least laying out what are very practical things. This doesn't have to be some crazy magical conspiracy, you know, in order to accept the cover-up aspect.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, like I said before, dude, it when you look at how those departments work, and how they're structured and how infrequent they would even need to be involved, you know, it certainly it matches up with reality in my world. So
it absolutely does. All right, man. Well, I guess we can wrap up this discussion of Sasquatch cover-up in our episode 6 of Squatch Talk. Thanks everybody for listening. And quite soon we'll be back with our second guest, Mr. Justin Smea.
Yeah, that'll be coming up pretty soon, hopefully within the week, maybe sometime this week, maybe. Yeah.
I believe that's probably right.
All right. Cool, man. Yeah, everybody have a good day, and I guess we'll talk to you soon.
We'll talk to you soon. This is Ernie and Pat for the Primate Objective. And until next time, keep your eyes and ears open.
All right. See you guys.
Bye-bye.